Good morning, or good afternoon, or whenever you're watching this. This is early July, and I am going to continue with these series of videos. So, again, I don't know the status of where we are right now, but anyway, so I wanted to just get into, while we're at it, my dog Cody is helping me with this production. We'll see how he behaves over here at my feet. But anyway, so I wanted to just kind of continue, and where we left off was with the Declaration of Independence, and that is worth again taking a look at. I'm not going to spend the time really right now with it, but you should be at least probably reading it, the whole thing, if you have not before. It's worth it. But they do talk about the social contract and natural rights in the first couple paragraphs and Enlightenment ideas. But then you see there's a long list of he has, and they're obviously referring to the King of England there, saying all the things that the king has done. I'm just going to scroll through pretty quickly here, but all the things that the King of England has done that are leading them to revolt. So they create a long list here, and then at the very end, we therefore represent the United States of America, and they're going to sign this Declaration of Independence, which essentially creates like a hit list for the English government to go after these people. And so it was, you can see the list of people right here who sign it. It was noble, and it was brave of them, and it was also because they knew that they would be the people in charge, and then, if they were to be successful, they could become famous, and they could become wealthy, and they could become leaders. So they do agree to the Declaration of Independence, and then with the Declaration of Independence, once we sign that, we now need a government, and that is going to then bring us to the Articles of Confederation. The Articles of Confederation is going to be a creation of a really weak central government. The founders then, as we break away from England, we know we're going to fight a revolutionary war with England. We need a government, so they formulate this during the Revolutionary War, and it goes into effect sort of right at the end. And creates a really weak central government because they were worried about a government like the one they just were breaking away from, had broken away from with England. So they make it very weak, and so you can read the Articles of Confederation. It is a pretty short document. Some parts are interesting. Some parts there might be some good ideas that even today we could take on. But overall, the way you think of and in historical terms know and learn the Articles of Confederation is learn its weaknesses. So I put a list here of several of them, and understand that they did this in general because they wanted a weak central government. They wanted power to lie in the hands of the states. So they made it so there was only one branch of government, which we would today consider to be a weakness. They had a legislative branch that did not have a lot of power. It did have a sort of figurehead executive, but there was no real executive branch or judicial branch. The national government did not have the power to tax. They thought that was something left up to the states. The national government could sort of ask for almost like donations for the states to give them, and so it was very difficult to raise any money. There was no standing army, which is a permanent army like we have today, so there was just local and state militias they could call up if there was an issue. Again, they were afraid of an oppressive government. States could coin their own money. During the Revolutionary War, the U.S. government made continental dollars that basically became worthless. And so you had different states making money, and so it was very difficult for business transactions. The national government could not regulate trade between states, and again, just keeping their power at a bare minimum. 9 out of 13 states were needed to approve a law for a law to go into effect, national law. I don't know if that's really a weakness. That's a different fraction. They're basically looking for 2/3, and since 8 out of 12 is 2/3, and they had 13, 9 out of 13 was really getting over that 2/3 thresholds to pass a law. To amend the Articles or change the Articles of Confederation, all 13 states needed to approve, or it had to stay the same. And that's going to play, I guess, a big issue at the convention. So if you've taken maybe APUSH or something, you probably learned about Shays Rebellion. Shays Rebellion is not it's a historical event, not a big part of this class. It has been on the AP test before, and they just want you to understand that it was sort of the last thing where there was already in the works plans for a constitutional convention in 1787. But in 1786, these farmers got together. They couldn't pay their debts and they were frustrated. And so they revolted against the government in Western Massachusetts and they overthrew it. There was nobody to put down the rebellion because there was no national standing army. And the local militias were made up of these farmers who had been Revolutionary War soldiers, and they were the militia, so they weren't going to put down their own rebellion. As they started to march towards Boston in eastern Massachusetts, the bankers and merchants and important people, powerful people in Boston in that area were scared. So they basically paid a mercenary army to go out and put down the rebellion. The rebellion fell apart, but it made a lot of people think, oh my gosh, wow, like we need to have an army. We need to have a powerful government. We could have these rebellions all over the place of people, taking over and overthrowing local government. So it created a really weak government overall. And so what happened then was let me switch to the next slide. They called for a constitutional convention, and 12 of 13 states sent representatives to Philadelphia in the summer of 1787. And they went to Philadelphia under the assumption that they were going to revise the Articles of Confederation. Since Rhode Island didn't send any representatives, Rhode Island figured there's nothing they can do because we're not there. They don't have a unanimous consent to revise the Articles, so whatever. One of the weaknesses I probably should have added under the weaknesses of the Articles is every state had basically one vote. Every state could have 2 to 7 representatives under the Articles of Confederation, and they all got one vote in the government. And so Rhode Island figured the only thing that would happen is they would lose power because Rhode Island had the same amount of power as Virginia and Massachusetts and some of these other states, even though they were very small. And so Rhode Island didn't want to lose its power, its representation. So anyway, what they're going to do, going over a couple of these issues at the Constitutional Convention, just because when I do these little presentations, I have to figure out what to cut out. And so, what happens at the convention, I'll leave that out for a second in terms of, or for today, in terms of what the people were like and what they were doing and who was there and all that. But some of the issues they had to deal with, everything was a battle. And it took a couple months, and they were in hot or humid conditions in Philadelphia, and they kept everything secret. But they really struggled with the representation and how that would work, and they kept going sort of back and forth on this. And so they come up with the Virginia plan and the New Jersey plan, are 2 different sort of opposite plans, and they're going to throw those out there and ultimately create the Great Compromise. So basically what happened was there's a Virginia plan out there. Virginia plan, you can see a little bit if you can read that on the top right. They basically came up with this idea that we were going to have representation or power for the states based on population. So let me pause this just for a second on my dog line. I have to pause this here and there because my dog is not handling being ignored very well. So anyway, the state of Virginia, there's this proposal that they're a big state, high population, and it is the basics are, the big thing is to make the representation for the states based on population. So the bigger states have more population, and they have more population, so they have more representatives in Congress. Since that scared smaller states, this guy, William Paterson of New Jersey, just throws out another proposal. No, let's have equal representation for all the states. And most people they knew that was not going to pass because that's what was in the Articles, and they didn't love that. So they figured that they'd throw out this alternative proposal basically to force compromise. And so the Virginia plan was based on population. The Jersey plan was equal per state. So what they came up with was the Great Compromise. And the Great Compromise basically created what we have now. It has the Senate, which is 2 per state. 2 representatives per state, and it has the House of Representatives, which is based on population. So the bigger states get more say in the House of Representatives. They have more population, so they have more representatives. So the Great Compromise, we've got to make sure we know that one. That was one of the solutions they came up with at the convention. At the convention, they realized that they wanted more than one branch of government. So they copied what some of the states, most of the states already had, which was a 3-branch system. And so they come up with the legislative branch, executive branch, and judicial branch. And so those we will get into in separate chapters because we have whole chapters on each of those branches of government. They did argue a lot about how to choose the executive, how to do that, and so we'll get to that in a separate chapter. But they weren't sure if it should be a chosen position by like have a panel pick a leader, if we should elect a leader, if it should be several leaders or the president. We're just not sure. They weren't sure what to do. That was a struggle. But the last one, just to mention for today, is slavery. Slavery in the Constitution. It was allowed. A lot of times people will say, these horrible, awful people that allowed slavery, how would they do? How could they possibly do that in the Constitution? Well, the reality was that the two choices were these were the choices. The choices were allow slavery and have a United States, or try to ban slavery and there'd be no more United States because it'd be a fragmented country and we'd be easily picked apart by European powers. So the decision was, from even the people there who did not agree with slavery, was, okay, we'll allow it and we'll deal with it down the road because we need to form a strong country here. So in the Constitution, they do mention slavery specifically without using the word slave several times, and they also do it sort of indirectly. But the big ones, the three sort of biggies that most people learn in U.S. history class about slavery are the Three-Fifths Compromise, the fact the slave trade can't be banned until 1808, and then fugitive slaves have to be returned if they are captured by others in the North. So just the last two are pretty self-explanatory. The slave trade can't be banned at least for 20 years after the passing of the Constitution, and they'll ban it in 1808 through the U.S. government. But that meant for 20 more years they could import slaves, and then after that you could still buy and sell slaves. They just were not going to have them be imported. So and then the fugitive slaves, runaway slaves, have to be returned. So those were two aspects of where slavery was in the Constitution. The final one there, the first one I have listed, is the Three-Fifths Compromise. The Three-Fifths Compromise was just a way to count the population towards the House of Representatives representation. So the southern states wanted all slaves to count as a person when they counted up the population for number of representatives in Congress. The North thought, no, because you don't count them as people, they shouldn't count at all. And so what they came up with was this Three-Fifths Compromise, where 3/5 of the slave population would be the number that would be added to the state's population in order to figure out how many representatives they would have to Congress. So it was just a sort of a weird compromise that was made of figuring out the total number of representatives the state would get. So, and then there are other places in the Constitution they mentioned. They said that there's going to be a limit on a tax on export, or there'll be no tax on exports allowed. That was to protect the southern agricultural businesses of cotton and tobacco and things, so the North could not add huge taxes to those products, so that it would increase the cost so much and crush the southern economy and thus end the need for slaves. So there's no tax on exports allowed. They put a small tax allowed on slaves, and that was in there. There was a couple other indirect things, but the big ones to make sure we know is that they did allow slavery to kind of get the country started. The Three-Fifths Compromise is an important one. So we can't ban the slave trade until 1808, which they do, and then you can't read the one on the bottom, but fugitive slaves must be returned to their masters in the South. So that's in the Constitution. And those are the three big areas that were dealt with at the Constitutional Convention, and we will get into more specifics as we go through other units. So thank you for paying attention, and I guess I gotta go take my dog for a walk.